Welcome to the What If It's Not Depression podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Achina Stein, and today we are going to be speaking to Dr. Catherine Clinton. She is a licensed naturopathic physician and has spent over 15 years helping people overcome their health issues. Diagnosed with two autoimmune conditions and Lyme disease while in medical school, she began the long and difficult journey of healing a long and difficult journey of healing, a path that led to the commitment to help others to not only heal physically, but to return to the relationship we evolved over millennia with for a deeper sense of health and belonging. By healing herself and patients like her, she discovered that true health comes from our relationships. Dr. Catherine has learned how our quantum biological system is intimately and inseparably connected to the world around us. Our relationship with the dirt, our relationship with the dirt beneath our feet, the sun, the wind, the water, the plants, the seasons, each other. That is the real medicine. Her mission is to empower as many people as she can with this knowledge to encourage the paradigm shift. So we so desperately need. Boy, I'm having trouble reading today. So let's just dive in. I'm going to have you talk and explain what quantum biology is. Let's just start right there.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. And that's a great question because most people have heard about biology and most of us have heard about quantum physics, but not many of us have heard about quantum biology. And that's really the marriage of the two. So quantum biology is looking at quantum phenomenon like tunneling, entanglement, coherence in living systems. This used to be only studied in a quantum physics lab that was cooled down below absolute zero where no life could exist. All the noise was shielded out so that it didn't disturb these quantum phenomenon. But now what researchers are finding is that it is that noise of the body. It is that chaos of a living system that enables these things. So really it's the study of the smallest pieces of our biology, those electrons, those protons, those photons of light, those phonons from sound, and how they impact our biology and give rise to what we see on our lab values and our symptoms and our health overall. It's an emerging field that's absolutely fascinating, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And I think it's really helpful to understand why it's so important. People don't really recognize that they are electrical beings. I mean, they know that they can get electrocuted, but they don't understand why that can happen. And so, because we are electrical beings, we are affected by all sorts of energy sources. And I think on a cellular level, where we have neurons, and cells actually exchanging energy through electrical impulses. And our heart is an electrical organ, our brain's an electrical organ specifically. So I think people do know parts of that, but maybe if they understood the why and how that's all connected to the world is going to be really important for people to really appreciate why we recommend certain things. That seems so simple, but it's so powerful at the same time.
Oh, absolutely. It's so powerful. Dr. Wallace has done amazing research on the mitochondria, right? Those little powerhouses inside our cells. And we're made of trillions and trillions of cells, right? And they're in every organ system, every system we have in the body, these mitochondria. And he found that when there's a decrease in that electrical voltage of the mitochondria, then symptoms and diseases ensue, right? And for a podcast that's dealing a lot with mental health and depression, it's really important for us to understand that that electrical voltage and maintaining our negative charge within the body is really paramount when it comes to mental health and health overall. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about the flow of electrons through that electron transport chain that many of us probably heard of in, middle school or high school biology. And that's the little chain of proteins that the electron goes down to create ATP, that energy currency in the body. And if that is decreased, then we start to have symptoms. And so oftentimes we're looking for a chemical, mechanical root cause of disease, right? And that chemical mechanical model absolutely exists, absolutely is at play in the body, but there's also a quantum biological one, an energetic one. And a way to understand this is, like I just said, we have trillions and trillions of cells in the body, and each one of those cells is completing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of tasks. Some people even, some researchers even estimate millions of tasks each second. And the current model, that chemical mechanical model of random collision, where we have those enzyme keys and receptor locks, and they have to randomly collide, sort of bump into each other in a dark room until they find each other, that makes this impossible. There's no way for us to complete hundreds of thousands of tasks each second in
Mhm.
each of those trillions of cells underneath that model. And that's where quantum biology comes in. It brings a new understanding of what's happening at the very smallest levels in our biology that give rise to that chemical mechanical model. And so it's a really interesting place to start, because sometimes we don't need to go to that chemical mechanical model if we can address that quantum biological state of energy, of voltage, of circadian rhythm, all these things, photons of light and photons of sound, even frequency of thought. Martin Picard had a wonderful series of research articles where he found that our thoughts impact mitochondrial function and voltage. So it's so interconnected. Everything really fits together in this beautiful puzzle piece. But oftentimes we're just looking at one section of it. So I think it's a really important piece we've been missing.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. You're absolutely right, and I think if people can get that, if we can look at wellness from a microscopic or cellular standpoint, that you can affect a change on the macro, which you're calling the chemical, what was the word?
Mechanical.
Mechanical standpoint, yeah, because it's all connected. All of those cells create a macro organ, so to speak, and then those organs speak to each other, and then we as people connect in ways as well. So it really becomes um, uh, a domino effect, so to speak. Yeah. So when we
Yeah.
talk about, so sometimes we tell people to get to ground themselves, to walk barefoot on the earth or put their feet in the sand. I think sometimes people think, oh, it's just to relax me, right? And no, it's more than that. It's really a lot more happening when you connect to the earth. Can you talk more about that?
Oh, absolutely. It's one of my favorite things to talk with my patients about. So, when we're talking about grounding, we're talking about the idea of so there's cosmic radiation that comes into our atmosphere, our ionosphere, which is, miles and miles up in the atmosphere, and that gets transformed into lightning. And so now as we're talking, there are hundreds and hundreds of lightning strikes each second, replenishing this negative charge of the earth. So the surface of our earth has a net negative charge. And when we are able to come in contact with that, we are able to replenish our negative charge, like I was talking about earlier, that's so important for our health. And I often say to my patients, the earth is the socket and we are the plug. We have to make sure that we are plugging in to recharge. And it is relaxing. It's a wonderful way to induce a parasympathetic mode in our nervous system to relax, to um, boost the immune system, to decrease inflammation. But when we look at a really fine microscopic cellular level, we see that we can, and James Oshman is a wonderful researcher who's written about this profusely, tons of research articles and books about how our fascia and our fascia at the bottom of our feet are able to collect those electrons and send them where they need to be in the body to maintain that electrical charge. Let's say we have a decrease in our lungs, perhaps, or our brain, perhaps, and that fascia network can then distribute that electrical charge. And our fascia is really fascinating. When we look at it, it's in a mesophase. It's between a solid and a liquid, and it's termed a liquid crystal. It's liquid crystal, much like this technology that we are talking on today. And the reason I can see your beautiful face and we can hear each other and communicate on these screens is because of liquid crystalline technology, meaning that everything in that screen, the molecules are aligned and oriented in the same way. And when there's a pulse of light through them or electricity, they become oriented in a different way as a collective. They're all acting as a group together. And our fascia is much the same process. It's very similar to what we're using in our tech today, in our TV screens, our smartphone, our computer screens. All of these things rely on liquid crystal technology. And fascia is really the liquid crystal technology of the body. It is a so, when I was in naturopathic medical school and cadaver lab, it was the thing that we removed out of the way of the real stuff in the body, right? It was
Right,
that
right.
covering of all the organs, and it's connective tissue, and that connective tissue is made up of collagen. And
Mhm.
when you look at it at a microscopic level, we're very used to the idea of a double helix, right, with our DNA. Well, collagen creates a triple helix. It's called tropocollagen. And these tropocollagen nanotubules, right, they're very small. We're down on that quantum sized level, the nanoscale. These tropocollagen nanotubules, these very small tubules of collagen, actually span the body. So we have fascia going into every single cell in our body. It connects every structure in our body. And
Mhm.
these tropocollagen tubules are lined with water on the outside and the inside of them. And this water is a little bit different than the bulk water that is within the body. It is more tightly bound. So the hydrogens are tightly bound. It looks like a honeycomb, right, of hexagons. And as one sheet of this cell-bound water forms against these tubules, it acts as a template for more sheets to form. And Gerald Pollack and his team out of the University of Washington, he was actually the first one to identify this new phase of water. And he wrote the book, Fourth Phase of Water. But what he found was that it lines the outside of these collagen tubules and the inside of these collagen tubules so that if there's infrared energy present, which is present in our body, it's present from the sun that we're exposed to, it's present when we move. Because our fascia is also piezoelectric, like a crystal, back to that liquid crystal
Right.
capacity, right? Yeah. So when we deform a quartz crystal, it creates an electrical charge.
Mhm.
Same thing with our fascia. So
Mhm.
you have this built-in mechanism to create infrared energy that helps power and build that cell-bound water or structured water that's lining our fascia. And what he saw, what Dr. Pollock saw, was that it actually powers the flow of fluid and water and protons throughout this collagen network. Again, that's connecting every single structure in our body. So that the work of James Oshman really talks about how this fascial network is able to gather electrons from the earth and send them throughout the body where they're needed in this beautiful sort of quantum highway of fascia. It's really fascinating when you start to look at it on that level.
Right. That's amazing. That's really amazing. So yeah, it is as a result very relaxing, but it's not the same as, turning off your TV and just sitting on the couch and relaxing in that way, because is actually something happening. There is that gathering of electrons, as you just described, that's being, impulsed or pulsed through your body, and the more you do it, the more that will happen. So that's what we mean by grounding, right? Grounding. And there really is something happening. So you did a great job as describing on a microscopic level of what's actually happening. And so, you mentioned that disease, it can occur, dis-ease or disease, can occur as a result of this process being disrupted. Can you talk about what disrupts this process, other than us walking around in shoes that have rubber in them and like not walking barefoot? I'm sure there's other things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that when we're talking about the fascial network, it is important that we mention that a lot of things in modern life do disrupt that, right? So never getting out in natural light and that huge source of infrared energy on our planet, right? The biggest source of infrared energy comes from the sun. So not getting exposure to that, and of course safe exposure, right? I'm not suggesting that we go out and burn ourselves and create damage, because that too will damage that fascial network, right? I'm talking about safe exposure, morning exposure, sunset exposure, exposure to those both, the sunrise and the sunset, where, my kids and I call it the golden hour, where everything kind of has that beautiful orange hue to it. That's that red light and that infrared energy coming from the sun. And getting breaks throughout the day, taking that 10-15 minute break instead of sitting at a desk or sitting on the phone and scrolling. Just using that 10 or 15 minutes to be outside has an enormous impact that many of us aren't getting. And we don't even think that, oh, 10 or 15 minutes, whatever, I'm just going to relax here and see what's happening on Instagram or YouTube or whatever it is. That 10 or 15 minutes of daytime sun is so important for maintaining that fascial network. And another thing that we don't think about is movement. Like I mentioned before, when we move our fascia, it creates that piezoelectric charge. It creates electricity in the system, and that helps maintain that fascial system. And it doesn't have to be your HIIT workouts and your heavy lifting. I see a lot of patients that are really chronically ill and debilitating. And for me to say, go outside and do your high intensity interval training in the sun and, do your burpees and do all this stuff, that's completely out of their capacity. And it doesn't have to be that. Gentle movement is such a beautiful way to nurture that fascial system. And so, and of course, grounding, like we talked about, is also another one. But there are some things that modern life can actually degrade that fascial system, like cigarette smoking. That's a huge one that actually degrades that tropocollagen. Sun damage. So, of course, we want to be outside. We want to get that healthy sun exposure. But if we're not safe about it, if we're getting damage from the sun, that will actually break apart those nanotubules that we're talking about, those tropocollagen nanotubules that make up our fascial network. Some of the compounds in our world, like fluoride and glyphosate, actually remove the glycine from that collagen network and degrade it even further.
Mhm.
Processed foods can do the same thing. Those industrial oils can do the same thing. So, even though we're talking about this sort of like mind blowing, quantum network of fascia in the body, we're still coming back to the same things of move your body. It can be gentle. Go outside and see the sun, see the sunrise, see the sunset, eat whole foods that our grandparents would have eaten, right?
Right.
Organic, garden organically, avoid those pesticides. Smoking and excessive alcohol use are other things that can degrade it. So even though we're talking about this amazing new emerging field of science, we always come back to that sort of base of traditional whole living and life. And so it's wonderful to kind of go full circle back to what you speak about all the time.
Right, right. Yeah. And I'm sure, I mean, I'd like you to maybe uh, talk more about this is how EMFs and 5G might also be something that degrades these electrical potentials happening on a cellular basis. If you can, talk about the science around that, that would be great because I don't think people, I mean, I don't think people really understand the impact that it has to the degree that it can have for some people, not everybody, but for some people, and to be aware of that. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we're talking about this system that is
Mhm.
based on electrical charge, right? So when we are inundated with Wi-Fi signals, it disrupts that charge. When we're inundated with artificial light, right? So I have this, it's really, I'm here in the Pacific Northwest and we can tell the sun came up, but it's like dark and cloudy outside. So I have this ring light on in front of me with blue light. And those things actually um, make the space in
Mhm.
between those proteins in the mitochondria further apart, right? So the electron transport chain, it kind of looks like a beaded necklace, right? With these proteins along the chain, these big proteins. And there's four of them, and the fifth one is ATP synthase that turns, and the final product is ATP. And for these quantum phenomenon, for quantum tunneling, so our electrons actually tunnel, right? When we learn about it, I think about those animated videos that I learned in school where the electron is just bouncing from protein to
I know.
protein in the mitochondria, right?
Yes,
Um, yeah,
yes,
and actually what they're doing, what the electrons and protons that come down from the inner mitochondrial space, they are both tunneling. They
mm,
are quantum tunneling. And quantum tunneling is the idea that if we can imagine a soccer ball and a hill. So in Newtonian physics, we need to kick that soccer ball with enough force to get over that hill, or it's just going to stay on the other side. With
right,
quantum tunneling, because of that duality, that the electron is both a particle of matter and a wave of energy, it allows it the capacity to go through that obstacle, to go through that obstacle. And it's not really a hill and a soccer ball, right? It's an obstacle of space or energy deficiency. And quantum tunneling just allows it to move. Um, to the other proteins in the electron transport chain. And so if those proteins are spaced too far apart, then that tunneling can't occur, and we are not creating ATP, and we are not maintaining that electrical charge in the body. So
Mm.
that's a way to think about it. And I know when I talk about this, people are like, oh my gosh, like we're just inundated with wireless waves and our routers, and this is how we live our lives. And it's like, that is true, but the body is amazing. So for myself, what I do is I don't live in a cave without any internet, obviously. What I do is I make sure that I'm grounding throughout the day to regulate that electrical charge. And I just simply unplug my router at night, so that I'm not getting that 24/7 influence of these non natural EMF waves. And it's as simple as that. And we can get complicated about it and talk about shielding devices and all these different things. But on a really simple level, it's just remembering that our body is electric. And just like a plug that you plug into different sockets, right? If I plug my hair dryer in the US versus if I plug it in Europe, it's receiving different electrical inputs. And we just have to make sure that we get back to that base level of the natural input. It's not that we need to go around being scared and freaked out of the world we live in, because we do live in Wi-Fi. It's that we just maintain that consciousness that, okay, yeah, I do need to tend to that electrical charge. It's a real thing. So after a long day of work, I'm going to go out and put my bare feet in the ground. I'm going to maybe sit on the grass. A lot of our modern synthetic clothing, like spandex and some of these other things, don't allow us to conduct electrons from that interaction with the earth. But fabrics like cotton, linen, silk, these are all very conducive to that conduction of electrons. So that if I were to be wearing linen pants and I sat down on the grass, or I sat down on a log, or I sat down on a rock that's embedded in this net electrical charge of the earth, then I am grounding. It doesn't necessarily have to be those bare feet, because we're sort of getting into those months of the year where those surfaces are cold. Sometimes they're covered with snow, right? So just putting down a cotton blanket and wearing cotton plant or pants and taking your break that way is an easy way to maintain that electrical charge. There's grounding shoes out there. I mean, there's so many different options for us. We shouldn't feel um, scared and paralyzed by this modern life that we're living. We should feel empowered, because there's a lot we can do to maintain that electrical charge, and our bodies are adaptive. So if we receive Wi-Fi throughout the day in our job, in our homes, that's not the end of the story. We can correct that and modulate that just by coming in contact with the earth.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned the spandex or the polyester or synthetic types of materials that people wear, and a lot of people wear quite a bit of it, right? Like it's amazing. They're easy to travel with because they don't wrinkle and they don't shrink, and more types of clothing have those types of materials. And so it is, and I think that's also why some people feel more comfortable if they're sensitive to there is a syndrome called hypersensitive electromagnetic syndrome. And so people intuitively feel better in these types of clothing, the cotton, the linen, the silk, compared to these other synthetic types of materials. And so they do go back to that, sometimes even having to go to organic types of clothing as well, not just plain cotton, but organic cotton, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, and you're right. It's just very simply sitting on the grass, laying on the grass, on a cotton blanket really makes a big difference for people. It doesn't have to be their feet in the cold sand or the water or on the grass. So it's there's different ways of recharging. And I like your example or analogy of, different countries have different electrical inputs. And so, they're just different systems, and we're just another system that we need to recharge ourselves with. And getting into those habits is going to be really important. Aside from turning off your Wi-Fi, you can just keep your phone downstairs in the kitchen instead of at your bedside, right? Or have it at least 6 feet away from you. But honestly, it's probably best to have it completely out of your bedroom, right? And not sleep with your phone right next to you. So there's many adjustments that people can make. And I think as soon as they just consciously think about what's around them, and it will certainly make a difference over time once those habits are in place. But I think the most important thing or most important motivator or driver is just understanding why, right? Why are we doing it? So I'm hoping that people will take this on a deeper level, deeper understanding, and really move them to action. Move them to action for these reasons. So, are there any other tips that you have about what people can do besides what you all already mentioned? In your notes to me, you mentioned something about sound. Um, and also I just in thinking in my head, just being out in nature and forest bathing, and like that's what people mean by forest bathing, right? Right, tell us more about those two things.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, we're talking about maintaining this biology that we have evolved with, right? And that really looks like getting back to those places that we evolved over millennia with,
Mhm.
right? Being in nature, hearing the birds and the wind through the trees, that has a calming effect on our nervous system. It actually improves our cognition and improves our immune system. Just looking at green spaces or blue spaces by a river, lake, or ocean does the same thing. It puts us in that parasympathetic mode in our nervous system. It down regulates that instigator of depression or anxiety. It upregulates our mood and our immune system and our cognition. And when you look at what's happening, like what is happening when the wind is blowing through the forest and the trees and you hear that beautiful sound, well, it is releasing negative ions. So every time you're outside and you hear that breeze through the trees, you are also being inundated by all these negative ions that are released from the tips of those leaves and fir. What are those? Pine needles, right?
Yeah.
Those evergreen trees, right? Those are releasing, and it doesn't even have to be a tree. It can be a bush, it can be a field of grass. All of those things release negative ions when the wind blows through them. And we readily accept those negative ions just like we do those electrons from the earth, and they are basically doing the same thing. They are decreasing our inflammation, whether that is, in our brain with our mood, or if it's throughout the body with physical symptoms, right? It's decreasing inflammation, it's upregulating that immune system, upregulating our cognition, and really balancing that nervous system. So when you look at it from that microscopic quantum biological lens, you see that really we're just going out and bathing in a sea of negative ions. And this happens even if we have rubber shoes on, right? Um, so our skin readily accepts these things. Our breath, when we breathe, readily accepts these negative ions. And it's just a beautiful way to support our health in a way that we intuitively feel more relaxed, more at ease. And when you look at the research, it only takes a few minutes for us to regulate our nervous system when we're grounding or when we're out in what I'm talking about now, out in an area where there are trees or grass or bushes, and we're exposed to these things. A lot of the forest bathing research out of Japan looks at multiple hours, multiple days, which is absolutely wonderful. If we can fit that into our schedule, if we can make that an annual or biannual routine to go camping, that's wonderful. But if that's not where we're at, just getting a few minutes of that exposure is so beneficial.
Right, right. And a lot of people actually find camping to be a very relaxing experience. They sleep better, they sleep deeper, they feel more refreshed and relaxed. I think it's not because you're on vacation, not just because you're on vacation. There's actually on a deeper level, things are happening that people don't realize. So yeah, I appreciate your perspective and everything that you've offered. Is there anything else about this that you think my listeners need to know?
I think that we've talked about a lot of relationships with the world around us that can bring us back to health. And I think that's really important to tend to those relationships. But there's one relationship we haven't talked about, and that's our relationship with ourselves, right? And so, Heart Math Institute has done amazing research with this idea of heart coherence. And this is that quantum biological perspective of things vibrating at the same tune, right? Like two tuning forks. And research has shown that a lot of our proteins and enzymes in the body communicate this way. And so, this idea of coming back to heart coherence and how it fosters a calmer, more steady nervous system, how it fosters a decrease in inflammation, how it fosters a better cognition. When we're in a state of heart coherence, our heart and our brain are innervated via the frontal lobe so that we can make calm, rational decisions. When they're not coherent, we are innervated through the amygdalas in that fight or flight state, right? And we all can recognize how that feels dysregulated and not a sense of ease. And so I encourage everybody to kind of look into these exercises. There's tons of them on YouTube. We could do one right now. It only takes a minute or two. Basically, what you do is you slow your breathing down to a rate that's comfortable for you. There's no magic formula
Mhm.
with that, right? We just slow it down to a comfortable, slow breathing, nice long exhale. And then you bring kind of your attention to the heart and you breathe a few breaths, kind of bringing that attention to the heart. And then what you do is you think of something that brings you joy or gratitude or contentment. It could be of a goal and thinking about achieving that goal. It could be a memory of something really beautiful that happened. I often think, here in Oregon, we get such a small window of beautiful sunshine in the summer, and it heats up those rocks by the river so they're nice and toasty. And so when you get in that freezing cold river, even in the summer, you climb out and you lay on this warm rock, and then the sun is kind of kissing your whole body. And that's one of the things I think about when I'm doing these exercises, just this beautiful sort of hug from the earth that I get, or those hugs from my kids where their legs and their arms wrap around you. They're getting kind of old now for that, but I certainly, I certainly remember how that feels. And things memories like that we not only think about while we're breathing and being conscious of our heart center, we actually try to feel them, right? So it's not just like, oh, I remember that. It's actually being there and feeling that love and joy. And that creates what the Heart Math Institute calls heart coherence. And they have, this is something, like I have software and monitoring devices where we can hook people up and measure their heart rate variability and their heart coherence. And so there's science behind this, but experiencing it is something that takes just a couple minutes. There's lots of videos out on YouTube about it. And it's a wonderful way to kind of cultivate and tend to that relationship within us. We don't even need to go outside, right? Those days where we can't get outside. Um, there's a way to foster that quantum biological coherence and foster what we've been talking about just by going within.
Right, right. And I'm sure hugging another person brings you to that same place, a real deep hug with people, where you can connect with them emotionally as well. Um, Two hearts can have coherence just by being close to each other. So sitting next to people, and that's why people feel heard in on a different level, or accepted on a different level. It's because of that heart coherence that occurs. So again, yet another thing that happens and you don't even realize it, but that's what's going on a micro level between two people.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And we should mention animals too, right?
Absolutely.
Because a lot of us don't have a lot of safe relationships and they might not be in our immediate vicinity, right? But those pets, those cats, those dogs, touching those pets not only help us charge because they're usually outside and gathering those electrons, right? So it can help ground us in a way, but also it can help regulate our own heart coherence, like you're saying, just by snuggling and petting those animals in our lives, we can get this benefit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that too. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think we took this topic and turned it upside down and inside out and talked about everything that we want our listeners to know so that they can start putting these recommendations into into action basically, and then it's not silly or stupid, or why do they keep telling me to do this? It's like there's a reason why. There's a reason why. So, and it is so now I hope that people will be able to move forward with it too and really take it seriously. Yeah,
I hope so too. I absolutely agree. I think learning the science and the why behind it is just such a beautiful puzzle piece to put back into the equation. It's not just, go outside and relax. There's a real thing happening there. And so I hope it does open some eyes and some minds and some hearts to the
absolutely.
science and the why behind it.
Yes, yes. And just so the audience knows as well that there is a device from HeartMath that you can use to increase or create that coherence. And that is something that I'll have in the show notes as well. And maybe a couple videos that you mentioned. I'll get some links from you to include in our show notes. All
Oh,
right.
absolutely. Absolutely. Such great information.
Yeah. So, Dr. Catherine, I really appreciate you and your work, and I'm so happy that we were able to meet today.
Likewise, I've been a fan for years and I've just really enjoyed talking with you, and I appreciate you having me on today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.